Forrest and the Candy Man. Like a freight train rolling, bringing truth bombs down the line. Promoting the Southland 1 week at a time. Promoting the Southland 1 week at a time. SCV chat starts now.
It's Monday at 7 o'clock in the afternoon, so you know what time it is. It is time for your weekly episode of SCV Chat. I'm your host for the evening, Moose. And please remember, before we get into anything, the views and opinions expressed on this broadcast are not necessarily the views and opinions of the SCV, its GEC, nor any divisions, brigade, camps, or other subsidiaries. How is everybody doing this evening in the Southland? Got people from Biloxi, we got Casey, we got John, got Mr. Ron, and I'll talk more about Mr. Ron and the Kennedys at the end of the episode, so hint, hint, stay tuned for that. Got Miss Linda. We got the legend, past Commander-in-Chief Paul Gremlin Jr. in the chat. Cousin Vinny is always supporting in the chat. Florida Division's going strong. Mr. Sean, I believe you just sent me news for the Florida Division. I believe y'all elected a new commander, so congrats on that. We'll be, of course, talking about that Thursday, and if there's any elections that has went on in any division or any division news, please send it in, and I will talk about it Thursday on Look Around the Confederation. So, big time of the year for us. It's division reunion time, and then, of course, soon it'll be national reunion time. I, myself, am getting ready for the Mississippi Division reunion this weekend. So I'm looking forward to that. Miss Linda, good to see you in the chat. My Gigi, my Granny Gremlin. Let's see here. Anybody else? Chris in the chat. Good to see you, brother. David, nice to see you. It's rainy in Knoxville. Bless your heart, man. I feel like it keeps raining in Knoxville on you. But without further ado, let me check if I have any announcements. I do not believe I do. Please remember to follow us on all our social medias on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. We are trying our best to expand, and maybe we have more on that Thursday. Never know. But let's see here. Yes, I do have an announcement to make. Boots Mania shirts are coming out now. They are a limited edition. They will only run until January 6th, I do believe. So you need to get them as quick as you can. We'll be selling them. Hopefully we do well. And, of course, all the proceeds from our T-shirts here at SCV Chat will go to us to make the show better. And we might probably donate something to somebody. We haven't talked about that yet. It just depends on how the shirt does, really. They will be. That link will be shared to go get Moose Mania shirt after the show, 8 o'clock on the SCV Chat Facebook page. Don't limit the Moose. With what I'm doing right now, we had to set a limit and just kind of see what interest is out there. So, we are. We did limit it. I won't say what number. I guess I could say what number. We limited it at 50 T-shirts, so they will go up quick, and only 50 people will have a Moose Mania shirt. I'm going to be ordering my own Moose Mania shirt after the show. But again, a good evening, everybody. Good evening. We have a very special guest on tonight. Let me pull that up. So we will have Dr. Samuel W. Mitcham Jr., or Dr. Sandy. Dr. Sandy was born in Louisiana. He attended Northeast Louisiana University and North Carolina State University, and finally got his Ph.D. at the University of Tennessee. He has served as our Heritage Operations Historian of the Sons of Confederate Veterans, a commander of the Thomas McGurr Camp of 1714, of Louisiana, or my apologies, West Monroe, Louisiana, and is the author of several books, including It Wasn't About Slavery, Exposing the Great Lie of the Civil War, Bust Hell Wide Open, The Life of Nathan Bedford Forrest, Vicksburg, The Bloody Siege That Turned the Tide of the Civil War, and of course tonight's book, The Epilogue of Confederate Generals. I have been looking forward to this. He hinted at this all the way back when we did our book review of Bust Hell Wide Open. So I have been looking forward to this for almost over a year now, I believe. So I'm happy to have him on tonight. I'm happy to have a guest so distinguished. I see him smirking back there. I told him I was going to build him up here tonight. Again, how do we order the book? I'm sure Dr. Mitcham will tell us all about that. And speaking of which, now let me introduce to y'all Dr. Sandy Mitcham Jr.
Ah, great to be on again.
Well, great to have you on, sir. And of course, if you did not see, we had reruns episodes on Memorial Week. We just all took the week off on that week. But 2 Thursdays ago, Dr. Mitcham was on Look Around the Confederation talking about his novel. That was a very good episode. So if you haven't already, please go back and rewatch that. And of course, but first, tune in tonight because this one's going to be a good one, folks. So, Dr. Mitcham, how are you?
Doing good. How about yourself?
I'm blessed. I cannot complain, sir.
Well, I finally broke down and bought a new computer. It's nice to have a clear image.
Well,
I wore out that old one. I put, I think, 9 books on it, and it was ready for the scrapyard.
Well, it served its time well then, sir.
Thank you.
Someone asked. Someone said they bought the book. It's fantastic. Someone asked, "How do we order the T-shirts?" Commander Gremlin. They will be. You can go on our page after the show and buy one. Jesse just said he just purchased your book, so we're getting a lot of people that have got your book, which is good as always. And without further ado, do you have anything you want to say on the book before we get into the questions?
Well, if you don't like to read it, it'll make an excellent doorstop. That's how editors tell the difference between an amateur and a professional. And a professional talks in terms of words. Amateurs talk in terms of pages. And if you wrote a book and you use 10-point font and single spaced, it's going to be twice as big as a book that I would write with 14-point font, double spaced. This book was 252,000 words. The average book is 60 to 70,000 words. So you're really getting 3.5, 4 books for the price of one on that book. You can get it through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Regnery History, any bookstore can order it for you. And sales are brisk. It was number 1 in Confederate books here a day or two ago on Amazon. My editor's quite happy right now. So, but it was fun to do. You spend a year and a half, 2 years with some very uplifting men. A few of them weren't. You had all spectrums, all kinds of people, and all kinds of different values. I guess Richard Montgomery Gano was one of my favorites. His great-grandfather apparently baptized George Washington. Some historians dispute that, but that seems to be what he did. They called him the fighting chaplain in the American Revolution, and George Washington asked him to end the American Revolution with a prayer. His grandfather was a general in the War of 1812. His father was a leader in the Restoration movement, Christianity. He baptized over 10,000 people in his storied career. And Gano, after the war, became a disciple of Christ / Church of Christ preacher. And he baptized at least 4,000 people. And I've seen one source that it was 10,000. He was a extremely Christian man. And well, he wouldn't even drink any stimulants. That included coffee or iced tea. So he was, and after the war, he had a talent for success, no matter what he did. He fought in 72 engagements during the war and was successful in all but 4 of them. He was a very good general. Stanway, he thought the world out of him. He worked under Gano for a while. And after the war, he went into cattle ranching. His great loves were Jesus Christ and stock breeding. And his ranch totaled 55,000 acres. It's bigger than some counties. And he succeeded in improving cattle strains, horses, pigs, you name it, and helped establish over 30 churches and, like I say, multiple baptisms. And thank Ron Kennedy for his kind remarks. But Gano was interesting. His great-grandson, whom he knew, was Howard Hughes, the aviation pioneer and eccentric billionaire, who didn't live up to the pristine moral standards of his great-grandfather, but interesting family altogether. You got any questions for me, Moose?
Yes, sir, I do. I forgot I muted my mic to check my monitor. Make sure that we were playing audio and going strong live. Yes, sir, I have a good couple questions for you. The first 2, I'm going to love to see what the chat thinks about this. Probably it's one of those things where people will always dispute, the first 2 at least. My first question to you, sir, is who was the best Confederate general in the war?
Well, I'm prejudiced. Nathan Bedford Forrest was the best general. General Lee said so. Grant and Sherman sort of said so. They qualified a little bit. Sherman said he was the best cavalryman in American history. And his method of waging war was brilliant and simply incomprehensible to me. And General Grant made a similar remark. He said, for the kind of warfare that Forrest was called upon to wage, neither side could present a better man than he was. He was an unadulterated military genius. He's a first-grade dropout and rose from private to lieutenant general in 4 years. Now, I have a military background myself. I was a platoon leader, company commander, battle group commander. I graduated from Command and General Staff College, qualified through the rank of Major General. Forrest knew more the day he plopped his behind in a saddle than I knew. It's like it came from the air. He didn't know the terminology. His first battle, he wanted to attack the Union flanks, which he often did. And his order was take them in both ends. But a uniquely American story. He was awesome.
Oh, yes, sir. I agree. And, of course, everybody on here knows that I'm very passionate towards Robert E. Lee. But I'll have to agree with the general on that for sure. I think General Forrest was just a complete genius.
Yes.
And to not serve and to go from private all the way up to lieutenant general, that just shows how brilliant he was in the war. And I think, without a shadow of a doubt, he's one of the greatest generals to ever live.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of like you. That's one of the reasons I wrote this book. It really got my attention when I read that Robert E. Lee in a newspaper interview listed Forrest as the best general in the Civil War. He says, a man I never met. His name is Forrest. And I got to confess to you, I was 12 years old before I found out that General Lee was not part of the Trinity. My first books were given to me by a cousin who was old enough to be called uncle. and it was the original 4-volume Pulitzer Prize-winning edition of R.E. Lee. I've still got them. And for years, those were the only hardback books I owned, other than textbooks for school. And if Lee gives him that kind of endorsement, you got to really take it seriously, in my humble opinion. Beauregard, Joe Johnston, Lee, people who wouldn't agree with each other on anything else are rated Forrest at the top of the list. So, this book, it covers Forrest and Lee and all these others, but it also covers a lot of the more obscure generals that people don't know about. And some of them had more interesting stories than the professional soldier who came out of the regular army, went to the Confederate Army, directed our cause. I think I talk about Zebulon York. He was one of my favorites. Came from Maine. His village was almost within sight of the Canadian border. He had to travel south to get to Boston. And he was educated in Kentucky, Transylvania University, and somehow ended up in Vidalia, Louisiana. And he bought a plantation, and he bought another plantation. He bought another one. He ended up with 6 plantations, he and his partner. They owned 1,500 slaves, which may be the most of anybody in the whole South. He adopted the Southern way of life. War came. He ran for delegate to the secession convention. Nobody ran against him. And he voted to leave the Union. And he raised his own regiment at his own expense. He paid more taxes than anybody in Louisiana, property taxes. And at that time, Louisiana was number 2 in per capita income in the United States. So that's a lot of money. But he would not take the colonelcy. He had no military background. He had an ancestor who was an aide to George Washington at Yorktown, but he didn't have any, so he wouldn't take a rank higher than captain. But yet, largely through attrition, the Louisiana, 1st and 2nd Louisiana brigades fought themselves out in the war. And largely because everybody else was killed or wounded, he did become colonel of the 14th Louisiana. Got surrounded there in the Overland campaign, and his aide told him, Colonel, we're surrounded. And York said, well, that's good, because any direction we shoot, we can kill a Yankee. And he broke out, ended up commanding the brigade at the 3rd Winchester. And Union shrapnel tore up his arm. It was probably fired by the 1st Maine Battery, ironically enough. And they took him to the hospital and amputated his arm. And about that time, General Early was defeated, and the Confederate Army was retreating past the hospital. And a friend of his from town came in and said, let's go to my house. We'll put you in bed. The Yankees won't bother you till you've recovered enough sufficiently to survive the prisoner of war camps. And Zebulon York said, no, I will not do that. The Yankees will not take me alive. And he hopped on a horse, and this was about an hour after they'd cut his arm off. And he rode over 20 miles to the nearest medical facility. Zebulon York could go bear hunting with a switch.
I couldn't agree more. Wow. I'm definitely, my interest is sparked in that man now. And again, that's what this book's about, because personally, I've never heard that story before. And so to expand your knowledge, not on just the well-known generals, but all the generals, and to get more stories and to learn more about the generals maybe people don't remember. That's why I'm very interested in your book, because I believe we need to honor all the people who served in the Confederate Army, Navy, Marine, et cetera. I want to learn as much as I can. So that's why I'm very interested in your book. Right. And why I'm about to be very interested in this next question.
All right.
Because this one is the one I would love to see the comment section, the chat heads, what they think. Who was the worst Confederate general?
My friend Donnie Kennedy always said it was Braxton Bragg. I always thought it was Lucius Northrop, the commissary general. He was a disaster, bureaucratic. He created a bureaucratic monstrosity that couldn't actually collect food and distribute it to the troops. General Lee wanted to fire him way before they finally did. Jefferson Davis was a friend of his. He wouldn't fire him. Davis sometimes was loyal to a fault, and it certainly was in the case of Northrop. And they remained friends after the war. Davis finally had to fire him. It was February 1865. He wanted to appoint John Cable Breckinridge Secretary of War. And, General Breckinridge is a political powerhouse, former vice president of the United States. And Breckinridge just laid down the law. General Northrop must go or I will not take the position. And that was the end of Colonel Northrop. Davis had nominated him for a brigadier general, so he was a Confederate general because Davis had the authority to make appointments of that nature and also recess appointments. But Northrop was a complete disaster. They should have fired him long before they did. At Appomattox, they had no food. They had plenty of cartridges and powder. So those departments functioned well, but they were out of food.
A lot of the chat heads are saying Bragg or Hood.
Hood is a great example of the Peter Principle. He was a brilliant brigade commander, one of the best division commanders in the whole Army. And they promoted him to Corps commander, which was about his ceiling. He was a mediocre to poor Corps commander. But Davis promoted him to commander of the Army of Tennessee, and that was a terrible disaster. In fact, Commander-in-Chief McClooney told me something I didn't know about it in his book on Beauregard. Davis was within about a day of appointing Beauregard to succeed Joseph E. Johnston. And he just couldn't stand Beauregard. And he liked Hood. They used to go on carriage rides together. General Lee told him not to, but he ignored that, appointed Hood, and the rest is history. Now, I don't fault Davis for firing Joseph E. Johnston, frankly. I would have fired him too. He needed to be fired. He wouldn't communicate with the president. He was they'd been feuding for 3 years, and he wouldn't guarantee that he would hold Atlanta. And I think the last chance we had to win the war was to hold Atlanta past November 8th, 1864. Presidential election, Lincoln would have been defeated. Even Lincoln said he was going to be defeated. He thought he was going to lose. But when Atlanta fell, it reversed Northern public opinion overnight because they could see the light at the end of the tunnel. And they were right. I think the fall of Atlanta was the last chance we had to win the war. And Braxton Bragg is another example of the Peter Principle. He was promoted beyond his level of competency. If with the benefit of 20/20 hindsight, if I was Jefferson Davis, knowing everything I know today, I would have made Bragg director of training for the whole Confederate Army. He had that army at Pensacola down there in Florida, and some of the best regiments in the whole Army came out of Pensacola. Bragg was a great training officer. He was a good organizer. But at Shiloh, he proved to be a mediocre Corps commander. And when they got rid of Beauregard, they moved him up to the commander of Army of Tennessee, and that didn't work out. But a lot of them didn't work out because you got to remember, both the Union and Confederate armies showed symptoms of forces that had been built too quickly throughout their careers. the whole Army of the United States in 1860 was 16,000 men, and over 1,000 of those were on medical leave. Total number of officers was 1,100. Now, during the war, 2.8 million men served in the Union Army. 800 to 850,000 men served in the Confederate Army. That's well over 3 million men. 1,100 officers just ain't going to cut it. Now, there were some militia generals, of course, and some from VMI and the Citadel, and that helped. But overall, it was just too much, too fast. And you had some West Point generals, but don't forget, and people do forget this, West Point in those days produced second lieutenants just like it produces today. You got a 22-year-old second lieutenant. Let's give him a platoon, but he's not ready for a regiment, much less a brigade or division. But neither the Union or Confederate Army had any choice. They had to put them in command, and they had to do on-the-job training. And just to be blunt, combat ain't no place for on-the-job training. And it cost us a lot of men. Of course, so did politics. And I think I'll say something controversial. We had a big advantage in Jefferson Davis over Abraham Lincoln. I know it's considered sacrilegious to criticize Lincoln, but Abraham Lincoln was a military illiterate. He had served less than 90 days in the Army, and all he succeeded in doing was getting demoted from captain to private. Now, Jefferson Davis was involved in the same war. As a matter of fact, second lieutenant, he swore Lincoln's company into federal service. It's the first time they met. I found that out from Dr. James McPherson over in Princeton. Davis did one combat patrol, personally captured Chief Black Hawk and ended the war. But then he stayed in, and neither Davis nor Lincoln heard a shot fired in anger in the Black Hawk War. But Davis stayed in, distinguished himself, commanding the 1st Mississippi Rifle Regiment at Buena Vista in the Mexican War. He was Secretary of War under Franklin Pierce. He had an idea what he was doing. Now, he did make some political appointments. Some of them turned out to be disastrous, most notably John Floyd at Fort Donelson. But Lincoln did so much more frequently, and he did so until late November of 1864, after he was reelected. Grant, I think, must have had a talk with him because they got rid of Spoon's butler, who was commanding the Army of the James. He was another one of the Union disasters. Nathaniel Banks, Francis Spiegel in the Valley. Lincoln's first Secretary of War was a crook. His name was Cameron, Pennsylvania politician, former senator, later senator again. He was a machine politician. And he awarded contracts based on cronyism, kickbacks. North really got off to a very bad start. Lincoln did defend Cameron a little bit. He said, jokingly, "I do not believe he would steal a red-hot stove, but he'd steal pretty much anything else." He was, like I say, we were fortunate to have Davis. He had a share of warts, but you got to remember the white population of the North was 22 million. The white population of the South was 5.5 million. Northern historians frequently cite the population of the South as 9 million. 3.5 million of those were servants, were slaves. And you really can't count them the same as the whites because they were not devoted to the cause. And anyway you cut it, it gives them a population base of 4-1 over the South. Plus you've got to add that Lincoln recruited mercenaries on a massive scale. The North recruited 489,920 mercenaries from 15 different countries. That's over half the size of the total Confederate Army over a 4-year period. Confederate Army never, I don't think, exceeded 300,000 total. And to me, the amazing thing is not that the South lost, but that it held on for 4 years. It did that because of its devotion, the soldiers' devotion to the cause, and the South, frankly, had better officers. But let me throw in this real quick. The Confederate generals were better by degrees, not by orders of magnitude. So it wasn't enough to establish our independence. That was a mouthful.
Yes, sir, it was, but full of information and stuff I know everybody's finding interesting. Ask this real quick. Who was your favorite Confederate general?
I liked Richard Gano, Zebulon York, and Nathan Bedford Forrest. I don't know that I like any one of the three better than the other. And I frankly like Richard Taylor. But I'm from Louisiana. And I wrote first Civil War book I wrote, and Shotwell, I think, is going to do it, reissue it at the end of the year, was Richard Taylor in the Red River Campaign. And Taylor had 8,800 men, less than 9,000 men. He faced a Union Army of 32,000. He kicked it all over the battlefield at Mansfield, routed it, and chased it 200 miles all the way across Louisiana, surrounded it twice, cut off the Union fleet. It had to fight its way out. He sank the biggest, or caused them to blow up the biggest gunboat in the Union inland fleet, sank multiple vessels, and was furious at Kirby Smith for taking 3 of his 4 infantry divisions. He surrounded the Union Army at Alexandria, despite the fact he was outnumbered 6-1, and he was trying to make them either surrender or abandon the Union fleet. Now, he was unfortunate because the Yankees had a great engineer named Bailey, and he figured a way to get them over the falls, and the Union fleet did manage to escape, but it was a near-run thing. And I like Richard Taylor. He resembled George Patton more than anybody in American history. He was opposing Nathaniel P. Banks. They called him Napoleon P. Banks, sarcastically, who was a former Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives. So here you have a comparison. If you can grasp this, you understand the Red River Campaign. The Confederates had the equivalent of General Patton. The Yankees had the equivalent of Nancy Pelosi. Guess who won that battle?
I'm just going to take a guess. It wasn't the Yankees.
It wasn't the Yankees.
That's a good one. I have one more question for our commercial break. And these next questions, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, are going to be some lovely, I wouldn't say hard-hitting questions, but I think questions that need to be answered. And I think your knowledge on the subject is going to come in handy to everybody watching. So I'm going to ask this last one, and then remember to stay tuned after this commercial break. Maybe stop and share this with your friends, folks, because it's going to get interesting after this one. How did the Southern generals stack up against the Northern generals?
Well, like I say, they were better by degrees, not by orders of magnitude.
Yes.
But our generals generally outperform the Northerners, and you will find exceptions to every rule. But Confederate generals were better. I don't quite know how to verbalize this, but all right, you have the best and brightest in the North and the South. In the South, the best and brightest were facing an invasion by a foreign enemy who could be very brutal. And they tended to join the Confederate Army, and the best and the brightest always rise to the top. And the women put a lot of pressure on them. And the Yankee best and the brightest didn't have to do that. If you were, say, a lawyer in Rochester or Buffalo, you didn't have to join the Union Army if you didn't want to. You could build your practice, and many of them did. So a lot of the best and brightest from the North stayed in the North and didn't put on the uniform. Some of them did. Enough of them did to make a difference, frankly. But the best and the brightest in the South fought. Like up here at Farmerville, Louisiana, there was one young man. Everybody joined the Army, but one young man didn't. He was perfectly healthy. He could have been a soldier. And a herd of women attacked him one day, took him down, and put a dress on him. And I don't know if they put makeup on him or not, but I hope they did. He deserved it. In fact, General Sherman when he took Savannah, he ordered the Confederate women out of the town. And they were packing, and Union officers came up to supervise and see what they had. And the women, you will not do this. And they went to General Sherman and told him to tell these officers to mind their own business. And Sherman looked at the Southern women and said something to the effect, well, you Southern women, if it hadn't been for you, the men would have given up long ago. But he told the officers, don't overlook their packing. Let them pack whatever they want to. You don't get to inspect it.
I like that.
Yeah.
Don't want to mess with Southern women.
No.
But
I got a book coming out end of August entitled Voices from the Confederacy. And I found a lot of good stories about Southern women. They were as tough as the men. They fought their own war, and they were innovative. They were brave, and they were very competent. Matter of fact, there are many people in Mississippi that think Ole Miss University was named not after the state, but after the Ole Miss, which was the name that gave the ladies that ran the plantation. And I think rightfully so. If it hadn't been for them, the Southern war economy would have collapsed long before it did.
Very true. We're going to get into our commercial break, and we're going to come back, and we have an excellent list of questions for Dr. Mitcham. So you don't want to miss that. Share this episode right now if you can, and stay tuned. And please remember, our sponsor today is the Confederate Legion. You can join the Confederate Legion today at www.makedixie.org. Doing a lot of things over there that are great over there at Make Dixie Great Again. Speaking of which, you might hear more about that next Monday. So there's a little hint for everybody. So make sure to go support them, and we'll be right back.
When my mother was in college, she danced with Confederate veterans. To me, it wasn't that far away. My father knew this. My mother knew this. Almost 50 years ago, I joined the Sons of Confederate Veterans. In those days, we weren't concerned about saving monuments or any of those things. That wasn't necessary. In fact, none of us had any remote idea that it would ever come up. We can't just sit there and react. We have to be proactive. Or, as Robert E. Lee said, the best way to disrupt your enemy's plans is to strike first. Everyone should do all in his power to collect and disseminate the truth, in the hope that it may find a place in history and descend to posterity. History is not the relation of campaigns and battles and generals or other individuals, but that which shows the principles for which the South contended and which justified her struggle for those principles. If you're looking for some place to be where you think you're going to accomplish something to save our history, go to the Sons of Confederate Veterans. I'm Thomas Lee Jesse. I'm a descendant of Private Daughtery Gilmer, a Confederate veteran.
All right, guys, we are back, and I'm going to start us off right off the bat with this question. I have been looking forward to this one, and I would love to hear your take on it. what do you think about the present-day leftist attempts to destroy the monuments to our Confederate generals, change the name of streets, basically destroy our heritage, and so on and so on? Because we've learned in this past year they will not. There's nothing that they won't brave away from trying to destroy, even final resting places of our veterans.
Well, first, before I answer that, I did an interview with Donnie Kennedy, 4 parts. It should be on the Make Dixie Great Again website, talking about some of the individual generals. So if you're interested in that, go to makedixiegreatagain.org. I'm not sure he's got them up yet, but he will very shortly. If he hasn't, he may already be up. I think it's deeper than that, Moose. The left wants no heroes but its own. And the Confederate generals are just the low-hanging fruit in their minds. Some of our people say you can't change history. Well, I don't believe that. I believe you can. It depends really, I guess, on how you define history. I define history as a study of the past with interpretation. And if you change the interpretation, guess what? You've changed the history. You can't change the past, but you can change the history, and that's what they're trying to do. And they want to, they defaced an Abraham Lincoln statue in Chicago, Colonel Haig in Wisconsin. He was a true believer abolitionist. Most people were not fighting for the slaves to keep them or free them one way or the other, but he was. He was killed or mortally wounded at Chickamauga. It took him a day or two to die. And they destroyed his monument. I can't imagine why. They're trying to change the name of Washington and Lee, ripping down. I did a 7-page article for the Abbeville Institute before the George Floyd riots about the non-Confederate monuments that they were destroying. And like I say, it went 7 pages. Vietnam veteran memorials, World War II memorials, anything that isn't a leftist Marxist monument. Now, I do, like Dan Borgino, I distinguish between a leftist and a liberal. You can still talk to a liberal. You don't have to agree with them. With a leftist, it's either you shut up, and if you disagree with me, you're just wrong and evil. And I think we're going to see a long, hot summer before this is over.
Oh, yes, sir. I think this is going to go on for a good couple of years. And, of course, I know whose side I'm rooting for and who I want to win. Mm-hmm. And I think the people have heard me talk enough about it on Look Around, what I think about the situation going on. Mm-hmm. But
well, I agree with that Facebook post. If a push comes to shove, I want to be on the side that has the guns and knows which bathroom to use.
I couldn't agree more. But yeah, I completely agree. They want to rewrite history completely to make themselves look better and to push their heroes on everybody. Mm-hmm. And to kind of, if you change the heroes, you change what kids will look up to and what they will aspire to be. And I think that's really what their main goal is behind that. But your next question is, how should we judge the Confederate generals today?
In what context? As military commanders, as people?
You know what? Let's go with as people, because we can't argue the fact that they weren't good generals. And a lot of people still study our generals' tactics and what they did. But I think a lot of people judge them as people now. And so I would like to hear your opinion on that.
Well, they cover the whole spectrum. Mm-hmm. You can find a Confederate general for every use. For example, Earl Van Doren, he had 4 illegitimate children. He fooled around routinely. In fact, that's what got him killed. His family for years put out that it was because he was fooling around with Dr. Peters' wife. There was a professor at Holmes County Community College, Professor Bridget Smith, wrote a book about it. And it turns out that wasn't really why he was killed. He was also fooling around with Dr. Peters' 14-year-old daughter and knocked her up. And she did DNA testing and the whole 9 yards. She did a very thorough job. It's best piece of forensic history I've ever seen. And that's why Peters shot Van Dorn. I kind of wondered about that because if Peters had shot everybody that fooled around with his wife, he would have been a mass murderer. She was an nymphomaniac. But fool around with daddy's 14-year-old daughter is a good way to get killed, and that's what happened to Van Dorn. So you got him on one side, and you got people like Thomas R. Cobb on the other. He was a great jurist. He didn't want to take political office, but we think he wrote the Confederate Constitution. It's written in his hand. And he was a brilliant man, but he thought that if you fooled around with a woman and got caught, you should be forced to marry her. He was a straight arrow. He, of course, was killed at Fredericksburg, ironically within sight of the house where his father had proposed to his mother. But that you can't get much further apart than that. Then you got some real heroes. Always thought the bravest Confederate general was Daniel Harvey Hill. He, if he thought a man was dodging too much, he'd make them stand at attention under enemy fire, load their muskets, hand it to him, and he would shoot at the Yankees. And then they would critique his shot. You know, did I hit him? Is he dead? Is he wounded? Did I miss? Where did I miss? And Daniel Harvey Hill was immune to fear. So was Stephen Dill Lee, but he didn't go that far. And they had a big issue early in the war. I didn't get into it in this book, but over the issue of dodging. Gentlemen do not dodge was the attitude of some people in 1861. Others took the attitude, I'm not going to get killed just for appearances. And kind of came to a head in the Peninsula Campaign as his captain had to deliver a message to General Stuart. He had to cross an open field near a Union artillery battalion, which was trying to kill him. And he rode what they call Comanche style. He was practically parallel to the ground. And he pulled up to General Stuart, and Stuart and the staffs were making fun of him. And Robert E. Lee rode up, and they asked which side of the issue was he on. And he looked at the captain and said, "That's right, Captain. Dodge them all you can." The captain got even with General Stuart at the Battle of Fredericksburg. Stuart was looking through his binoculars at the edge of a wood line, and a Union artillery shell went through the top of the trees, knocked loose some limbs. Stuart hit the deck. He was covered with leaves and limbs. And as he was getting up, there was that captain standing above him, laughing at him. So he got even. But Stonewall Jackson was an advocate of dodging, although he wouldn't dodge himself. It varied.
It varied, yeah.
You got the whole spectrum. I mean, you got very loyal people. You got Jubila Early lived with a woman for years and had 4 illegitimate children. That was not usual, but it happened. Rufus Barringer had 2 children by a slave girl from another plantation, and he claimed them. In fact, Walter Coleman was one of the children. He became the richest black man in North Carolina, and some sources say the richest in the United States. He owned his own textile mill. Barringer was a great businessman. He taught this young black person how to do it. Others, you got Robert Toombs. That was he was interesting. He one of his friends said If he was stupid, he would be dismissible. If he was sober, he'd be a statesman for the ages. Unfortunately, he was neither. He got kicked out of college. He was in what became the University of Georgia at age 14 and was dismissed for inappropriate behavior and drinking. He was an alcoholic. He was brilliant, but alcohol ruined his career. In fact, when the Confederacy was first formed, a great many people thought, the deep 7 states of the Deep South formed the Confederacy. They were thinking the president should be from Georgia because it's the most populous state. And they sent a delegation to discuss that with Robert Toombs, and he was drunk as a lord. And he chewed tobacco, and it drooled down his face onto his white shirt, created a very bad impression. So the delegation left, and they eventually, of course, selected Jefferson Davis. So Toombs, for a while, was front runner for the presidency of the Confederacy, but alcohol got him. And you'll see that with several of these generals. They couldn't control the bottle. Sibley over in New Mexico, they called him the walking whiskey keg. And Richard Taylor court-martialed him for cowardice and wanted to have him shot. Richard Taylor didn't take prisoners. The court-martial would not go along with it, but they did convict him for inappropriate behavior and ruined his career. But Taylor wanted to line him against a wall. That's just Richard Taylor, though.
No, yes, sir.
Anyway, you pick a person, and you'll find a Confederate general to match it. There are all kinds. One of them deserted. One of them showed cowardice, I'm afraid. His name was John Robert Jones. He was good brigade commander, but was wounded at Frazier's Farm, very painfully so. And when he returned to duty, he wouldn't face the Yankees. He'd find a way not to. He had to go to the rear. He'd sent the brigade out, and he stayed behind in the wood line. He left the field of battle, I think, at Chancellorsville for an ulcerated leg, and General Lee fired him. Then the Yankees captured him near his home, and Confederate authorities made no attempt to trade for him. He had to stay in prison the rest of the war.
Wow.
So, like I say, the whole spectrum.
Yes, sir. Now, this one, I think, is going to spark the interest for many people. And many people want to know, how to talk about this question or how to answer this question, really. Information-based and, so I'm really looking forward to see how you answer this one. Why did the Confederate generals fight? Was the war just about slavery?
No, the war was not just about slavery. Freeing the slaves was one of the major results of the war, but only one of them. Abraham Lincoln himself said that if he could preserve the Union by freeing all the slaves, he would do that. If he could preserve the Union by freeing none of the slaves, he would do that. If he could preserve the Union by freeing some of the slaves and keeping others in bondage, he would do that also. It was 2 years into the war before they issued the Emancipation Proclamation, and it really didn't have that much to do with slavery. What it had to, Moose, in my view, the South could have won the war one of 3 ways. They could have won it diplomatically, militarily, or politically. And the Emancipation Proclamation eliminated the diplomatic option for the Confederacy because France and Spain, their general population, by identifying the war as a struggle against slavery, Lincoln won them over to his side, and it was impossible for the ruling classes in Britain and France to declare war. They could aid the Confederacy, but they could not give them ships that they needed to break the blockade. They couldn't give them the armies they needed. And that's why Lincoln did it. You may remember the Trent Affair. Many people never heard of it. But Lincoln's myrmidons were foolish enough to seize a British ship on the high seas and remove 2 Confederate commissioners. And it nearly came to blows. These people were under the protection of the British flag. And the British took great exception to that and cut off the Union supply of saltpeter, a primary ingredient in gunpowder. And for a few weeks there, the Union could not launch a major offensive because in those days you had to have gunpowder to do that, and they didn't have enough salt to make enough. Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation to eliminate the diplomatic option. Now, the second option, of course, was militarily. We lost that, in my opinion, at Gettysburg and Vicksburg, although some of your well-informed listeners could come up with other scenarios how we might have won militarily after that, but they're usually tenuous. I think militarily it was over after Gettysburg. The political aspect was the last one, defeat Lincoln for re-election. And that came down to Richmond and Atlanta. If we had held those 2 cities, and Lee held Richmond, but Hood lost Atlanta with some help. And once Atlanta fell, I think realistically the Confederacy was doomed. Union public opinion was against Lincoln until then. They saw, like I said, the light at the end of the tunnel after Atlanta fell. And that was pretty much it. We made some last hurrahs, but it was pretty much over. Aren't you sorry you asked?
Yes, sir. I really am. But again, I want to thank you for coming on, sir. Our time for the episode, sadly, is drawing near to an end. I hope everybody has enjoyed this episode of SCV Chat with our distinguished guest and very wise man who has answered these couple of, I would say, hard-thinking questions now. Because when you answer any of these, our enemy will try to pick you apart and try to find any historical or wrong things in that. And so to answer these questions is a must, so we all can learn and be able to defend our heritage. And so I'm very happy you came on, sir. I'm very happy that we got to get to these questions. Mm-hmm. And I'm very happy, and I hope people go get your book because it is going to be full of information. And I myself am looking forward to getting it and learning more. I have been making a list of books to get after I graduate college so I can start regaining my own knowledge that I have been steadily losing since joining college, which is a weird sentence to say, don't you think?
Well, your real education, that will begin after you got your degrees.
Everybody keeps telling me that and then patting me on the shoulder and saying, good luck, son.
There is one argument I'd like to puncture right now because your listeners will hear this. Okay. They say that Alexander Stephens' cornerstone speech proves the war was all about slavery because Vice President Stephens allegedly said that slavery was the cornerstone of the Confederacy. Now, Vice President Stephens later said he was misquoted. I don't know if he was or not, but it's questionable. But the major point that I'd like to make is vice presidents don't make policy. Presidents make policy. Stephens was not Davis's choice. He was picked by the convention. They didn't get along that well. He spent most of the war in Georgia. When the Senate wasn't in session, he went home because he had nothing else to do. I'm reminded of a quote by Thomas Riley Marshall. You may not remember him. He's a footnote in history, 28th Vice President of the United States. But he said it very well. He said, once there were 2 brothers. One ran away to sea, and the other became Vice President of the United States, and neither were ever heard from again. And that's about how important the Vice President was. He certainly didn't make policy. If you're going to quote anybody, quote Jefferson Davis. He said, "We're not fighting for slavery, we're fighting for independence, and all we ask is to be left alone."
Amen.
Okay, I'm through.
Well, I'm happy you added that in there, because that is the quote that I would say gets thrown in our face all the time. It's the face that gets thrown in mine. It's the quote that gets thrown in my face all the time. I have heard that quote more times than I would like to talk about. So, I'm glad you wanted to talk about that, because that's something that needs to be talked about, so people can be like, well, his kind of like we do at the beginning of the show, his views and opinions really don't matter. If you're going to quote someone on the views of the Confederate government, quote Jefferson Davis. And so I like that. I will be definitely using that myself in the future. So thank you, sir.
Good.
And again, I want to thank everybody for coming on. We've had a great episode here today, large crowd. Remember to share this. If this only gets to our people, it can help, but it also needs to get to the people that have no idea about any of this, and so they can learn. And if they want to argue, let's have a nice, respectful debate. Sometimes you can change their opinion, sometimes you can't. That's just how life is right now. But definitely try to learn people, try to make other people learn. So please share this video, like it, and remember to tune in Thursday for a look around the Confederation. I'm hoping to have something special for you. I don't think I can comment on it yet. I need to talk to Christian Lee tomorrow and confirm it. But please make sure to share this episode and send an email to scvyouthOutreach@gmail.com, and you will be featured on the upcoming episode of Look Around the Confederation. And we'll be going through all camp and division news. And with further of that, I guess I got to say again, thank you, Dr. Mitcham, for coming on. Always a great episode when you're on, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Remember, chat heads, no Fumar in the elevator. All right, everybody. Good night. Ref Rock.